Už to máš zbalený?
Jo. Nějaký poslední rady do života.
Hezky se uč. Nauč se, že si musíš věřit. A že úspěch není zadarmo. A nezapomeň si to taky trochu užít. Zkoušej nové věci. A i když to bude těžké a uděláš pár chyb, nikdy se nevzdávej. Protože když se nebojíš jít si za svým, můžeš nakonec získat víc, než čekáš. Zkrátka, svět je teď tvůj, tak si ho přetvoř podle sebe. A dovol někomu, aby ti s tím pomohl.
Česká televize vás zve do kina. Žili byli
dva malí skřídci.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I feel like the host of a show. We are back live with Masterclass with Dominic James. That would be me. So I'm here today to talk to you about storytelling. I've just been told that we're going to shorten a little bit to 20 minutes, so I'm going to try and be effective. I wanted to share... first off, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm a producer and a screenwriter. I have a company called La Fête in Montreal, Canada, that specializes in family entertainment. Before me, the company was created by Rock Demers, which a lot of you know, who's made a lot of great films under the title Tales for All. I took over the company in 2015. And for 5 years, we were trying to figure out what it meant to do a good family film for today's market. It seems like a simple question, but it's actually quite complex in terms of screenwriting, We know that audiences have changed a lot. We've been told by a lot of people that their attention span is very short now because they have multi-screens. And I'm also a father of 4 children. And I noticed that a lot of the content, especially coming out from the United States, was really focused on grabbing that attention from the audience and really keeping it active with a lot of all the tools that we have as filmmakers, whether it's sound, action, explosion, lights, even and I realized that even my children would look at content and they would leave after having seen an hour or an hour and a half of content, and they would not feel that great. They weren't particularly happy. They weren't in a good mood. They were quite active and overexcited, not in a good way. And so all these little elements sort of led me to really try and figure out, what the problem was and how we were going to position ourselves in that market. I'm going to jump to a few years later and then come back, which is a strange structure way to do it, but it'll all come together. We had a movie called Cocoa Farm, which actually won here last year. I wasn't here, but the actor came, and sadly I missed it. So, Cocoa Farm won, and the movie had been released in Montreal over spring break, and the movie came out, and it was an amazing experience. The reaction was just great. We had a terrific premiere at the FIFEM, the festival owned by Joanne Blouin, who's here today, and we just had a great run. And then a few weeks passed, maybe a month or two, and I actually live in the countryside outside of Montreal. And in the movie, at the end, there's a pickup truck that's driving something, and the pickup truck was actually my pickup. And so we had to brand it with the Cocoa Farm logos on it and everything. And so I was stuck driving around with the truck with the logos of the movie on it. And I realized that there's this car following me to the grocery store. And then I park, and this old lady comes out, and she comes up to me, and she asks me how come the truck is branded with Cocoa Farm and everything. And so I have to tell her, well, I made the movie, and we use my truck. And then she gets very emotional, and she says, "Can I tell you something?" I was like, "Sure." And so she shared with me that she had a very difficult relationship with her grandkids. She didn't have a difficult relationship with her grandkids. She had a difficult relationship with her daughter, which led into her not having very much of a relationship with her grandkids. And when she saw the movie come out, she wanted to go see it with her grandkids. So she asked if she could take them to the movies, and she did. And she said it was one of the most beautiful experiences for her because they laughed and they cried together. And at the end of the movie, which is about a young kid that starts a business, at the end of the movie, the kids wanted to start a business with their grandmother. So they went back to the house and figured out what business they were going to start, and they started a little business. And then every Sunday for the following months, they would go to her house to work on their business. And she says, because of the movie, we have a relationship now. I get emotional when I tell the story because at the moment when that happened, for me it was sort of a revelation in terms of why we do this, why we're supposed to make family entertainment. Because movies have the ability to affect lives in a positive way. They have the power to bring us together and go through a human emotion. And then I realized that the big thing about filmmaking is that we're not in the entertainment business. We're in the human emotion business. And there's a big difference. And so we were looking at how do we develop these movies and how do we create these human emotions that can be felt through generations. So for years I kept saying to people, we don't make children's movie. You know, we make 4-quadrant movies. We make movies that have to speak to audiences from different generations. So the movie has to be as great an experience for the grandmother that it has to be a great experience for her daughter, that it has to be a great experience for her grandkids. And so the question was, on a screenwriting level and on a development level, how do you do that? You know, how do you speak to different generations? And the first thing that happened is that I was going through development hell. We had about 4 scripts that we were trying to develop for years with different writers, and none of them were coming up at the level of what we wanted. So I went and got help from a teacher that teaches out of Chicago, who I had read a lot of stuff that he wrote, and I just thought he was fascinating. And I said, can you help me build a development system that would allow us to do that, to create these human experiences? I got 5 eggs. And so we started working on how to get there, and we noticed that you know, we had a lot of great movies that had successfully done that, but the main thing for us and the main thing that he brought forward was to stop approaching story from story, but to begin approaching story from character. So as opposed to coming and saying, oh, I got a great idea for a movie, this is what's going to happen. You know, like this happens and then this happens, a terrific concept, but that's not a story. That's a concept. And so the problem is often writers start writing and they're going to use the characters to make that story work, as opposed to the other way around. So it should be start from character, understand the journey of this character that he or she has to go through this journey, and then write the story to make that work. So it's a complete flip on what I had been doing my entire career before. Because before I was a producer, I was a director, and I had tried and written some films, and the approach was always story, story, story. And even if you are interested in storytelling and you've read some of storytelling books and screenwriting books that are out there, they talk about character, but they mostly talk about story. So we know what we have to hit in terms of marks as a storyteller. We know where the turning points are. We know what we need to get at to have a complete story. But the problem with that is that that doesn't really create human emotion. It creates entertainment. So the big question for us is, say, so how do we build this? And the one thing that came to mind was, if we go all the way back to Joseph Campbell, who was a scholar, for those who don't know, and wrote a great book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Joseph Campbell was fascinated with mythology and the origins of storytelling and of myth. And the one thing that he realized is that as he started doing all of his research, he realized that a lot of cultures around the planet were telling stories, like very, very early on, with no way of contact with one another, no communication. They didn't even know that the other cultures existed. But when you put them together and you started doing an analysis of the storytelling, it's just like, let us imagine this as if it was a scene in Indiana Jones, and then you put the maps over one over another with a backlight, and you start realizing that there are dots that are at the same place. So he started realizing that all stories from different cultures had a very similar linear elements to them that connected them together, as if there was a code for storytelling that was deeply marked into our DNA as human beings. And what he described this was the quest to find our personal bliss. As if the human on earth, we all have, no matter what the country or where we're from, we all have one objective in common, which is to find our personal bliss. So we know a lot of people that say, oh, they look happy all the time, they look great, they look fulfilled, or the other way around. I don't feel fulfilled, I don't feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, I don't know. This is the quest to find our personal bliss. And it is the core of the narrative of storytelling. So when we approach storytelling, and I urge people to stop thinking of family entertainment as something for children, because children understand that. They feel it as they go through a story. They don't have to be talked down. They are following that journey with characters, because the movie is really about a guide of living. So, and its power is to help us go through conflict and challenges that are part of the journey to find your personal bliss. So if we take one character, for example, as children, we go through hardships, bad experiences, we get hurt. We hear things that are negative about us, about the world we live in, about our relationships. We are told sometimes negative things. And what happens is that we develop a defense mechanism to protect ourselves from that belief. So if someone says, you know, like I'm going to use the example of Cocoa Farm. Sorry. I'm going to use the example of Cocoa Farm. Max lost his mother when he was young, so he's living with his father. And so because he lost his mother at a young age, which is classic for family entertainment, he has a fear of abandonment. So what life has told him is you could lose your parent. You could lose anybody that you care for or that cares for you, and you could be alone. So the conscious mind's reaction to this is to develop a defense mechanism, is to say, well, I'm better off alone. As long as I control everything and I'm in charge of everything and I don't rely on anybody, then I'll be fine. So as storytellers, this is what we call a false belief, because we all know it's not true. So his desire is to create a business that he can run on his own, that he could be successful financially so that he doesn't have to rely on anybody, and that's what drives the story forward. His actions are driven by his want to find security. Now, we all know as audiences, we're looking at this as we're thinking, what's his need? So if the desire is to create a business to protect himself, we all know that his need is to be surrounded by people that love him and support him. So the whole journey of metamorphosis of this young character who's only 11 is to understand that he needs other people to succeed. And so when we look at this, the first thing that we do, as opposed to thinking in terms of concept, is trying to think in terms of why do we have to tell that story? Why is this movie important? You know, because we all know that it takes a year, 2 years of writing a movie. It takes another year to make it, another year to release it. That's like 4 years of your life that you're going to invest into one film, in one story. And for us, it has the key, and we've had scripts and we've had stories that we've pushed and pushed and pushed in development because we just can't figure out why we have to tell that story. What is the core of the story? Why is it important? So once we figure that out and we realize what the journey of this character is about, then we start developing a story to allow this character to go from the disunity of his false belief to the unity that's going to be created by him understanding his need. And so when we do that correctly, we end up creating a real human emotion, because as human beings, we're looking at this movie and we're engaging into the story of this boy, and we're following him through. And as we're watching the story, we ourselves as viewers are feeling the same thing that he's feeling, and a good story will allow us to heal or help us heal. It would allow us to grow, because it reminds us that change is possible. It reminds us that we could change. It reminds us that we can heal. It reminds us that we can overcome adversity. And this is not about doing movies that are moral driven. It's not supposed to be told. It's supposed to be felt as you watch the movie and as you go through the story with them. So writing from a character perspective allowed us to create stories that unite over frontiers and ages and generations, and we're writing our 4th film. The 3rd one is released this year, and every movie that comes out, we experience these great moments with people after they've seen the movies, and we realize how it connects with them differently. So each viewer is going to see something different in the story, but that sort of inspiring element to the story is really the core of what we try to do. So I had only 20 minutes. Well, how am I doing? Am I good? 5 minutes left? 2 minutes? 2 more minutes. I got 2 more minutes. Yes, so I'll do questions for 2 minutes so that we have some sort of a conversation and it's not just me talking the whole way through. So don't hesitate if you want to talk about storytelling or if you have any questions. Anybody? Or if anything, yes? Yeah, no.
Okay, sorry.
Louder, please.
You were speaking about the 5 first year. There was a struggle, and ever since you started using this concept, how did it progress at your work?
It's light and day, because before we couldn't always figure out what was wrong, and we had a lot of projects that we're looking at that we knew the concept was great, but we couldn't get the movie to come to life. And it was really annoying because, you know, you're spending money and time on these things, and then you look at it, and I work with my wife, who's head of development, and we have a team of creatives, and then we would get in a room and look at this, and it's like, why isn't this working? You know, this is a good story. I could pitch it. Everybody wants to do it. So why can't it come off the page? And the problem is that, like I said earlier, we were approaching it from story, and the characters were only there to try and make that story work, as opposed to the other way around.
Cool.
Any other question? That's it? I don't... Can you do 5 more minutes? That's it? Yeah.
So you're writing through the character. How do you uncover the story? Are there many paths to finding that finished film?
That's a good question. There's an exercise that we started doing very early on, and I didn't do that with Coco Farm, but I did that with Mademoiselle Bottine, which is in English Miss Boots, which is screening this week. And the approach is that your characters have to come to life, you know. So the feeling is that you have to trust that they exist outside of your mind, and you have to engage with them. So one of the things that we do is we'll have, and I will spend endless hours. You know, I get up very early in the morning, and I'm in my office at 5 a.m. Just because I haven't been in contact with anybody else yet, so my brain is still half asleep, which is a good way to write, because you're not thinking. And I have these conversations with the characters. Like if I feel like there's this, for Mademoiselle Bottine or Miss Boots, there was this young girl in the story, and I was trying to communicate with her, and so I would get in, and it's kind of like having a session, you know, as a psychologist or as a parent, and so you engage in these conversations, and then you free-write everything that's coming, and then and Scott, who's out of Chicago, we had a Google Doc, and so the way we work is when I do that, he'll read it later in the day and put some notes in it. And so I'm going through it, and I'm writing these things with her, and after 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I feel like an idiot, you know, like I know I'm writing the answers, and I know that I'm making this stuff up, and then, but we keep on going, and at one point, you know, it was a remake of an old movie, and in the movie she's an orphan, so Scott was like, I think you have a good relationship with her now, you could ask her about, you know, when she lost her parents, like, how was that for her? Which I did. So the next morning I get up, and at 5 a.m. I'm in the office, and I start And I started talking to her about it. And then, for some reason, this, you know, like when you're writing, this thing happens where she starts describing what happened, and she was in the barn, you know, because they lived with animals in the country, and then her parents had gone out for dinner at a friend's house, and then she heard wheels in the gravel coming up, and she knew just by the sound that it wasn't her parents' car and that something had happened. And she looked through the barn window and she saw a police car, a state police car, and so she stood hidden with the animals in the barn, and she wouldn't come out because she knew that the second she would come out of the barn, her life would change forever. And as I'm writing this thing, and she's telling me this thing in the morning, I'm crying and I'm like all emotional, and then my alarm, because I gotta go do breakfast with the kids, the alarm goes, I'm like, oh my God, okay, stop. So I stop. And then Scott calls me and he says, we have to get on a Zoom call tonight at 10. So at 10 I get on a Zoom call, and then Scott gets on a call and he said, it happened. And I'm like, what happened? He says, but she came to life. And then he started pointing out elements in the dialogue that she was saying in the morning, and then he compared them with dialogue that I had been written for the first 2 weeks, and it did not match. It was a different speech pattern. It was a different way of speaking, it was different expressions, different everything. And when I looked at it, I said, oh my God, what the hell is this? And he says, well, that's the whole point. She has come to life. It's no longer just you putting words into her mouth, it's her communicating things. And so it's a bit of a crazy approach, but if you want to write character first, then you have to know these characters. It can't be you. You can't use them. They use you. It's the other way around. And when you do that, then the next months are about figuring out what the story is to allow this kid to heal, because obviously she hasn't gone over that, and and so we developed the whole story based on the character's need. So it's a complete, but it's long and it's hard, and sometimes you have to be the shrink, sometimes you have to be the father, sometimes you have to be the friend, but ultimately it's about finding out what's at the core essence of that child or that character, whatever the age.
Fantastic, thanks.
That's it? Yay, thank you very much. Yeah, one more. Yeah. Exactly, you have to see the movie. Then you, oh, that's what he meant. Thank you very much. Have a good festival, everybody. Thanks.